James, you do have a guest with you now.
Yeah, Heather, I'm joined here with Kamau. He's a student activist with Howard University in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for joining us. What is it that the younger generation of African-American college students, what is it, the message that they want told?
Well, we want justice. And you see, the thing is, my generation was raised on the shoulders of civil rights giants. We were raised to look at the accomplishments of the civil rights movement and to look at the bitter struggle that our parents and grandparents had to go through. And that it shocks us that as millennials today, that in this country in 2016, we are still not receiving racial justice. And that's what we want most. We want racial justice, especially in the criminal justice system, economic justice as well. We want this country to really put a stronger value on black lives that has not been placed. And we want this country to live up to the meaning of its creed, that when it talks about justice, equality, and equity, that we actually want those things, and we don't want those things on paper, we want them in practice.
And what is your response when you hear people say, well, the black people who were shot by the white officers, there's more to that story in many of these cases. What do you say to them?
There's always more to a story. There's always more to a story. But where an injustice lies outside of the injustice that takes place is possibly rationalizing ways, in whatever creative way a person can imagine, that a person deserves for their life to be taken. People have rationalized and interpreted different meanings and different body movements to mean something that they possibly could have meant otherwise. And this is very easy to do when the other side of the story is dead. People will say, oh, there's always another side to the story, but what's really critical is to determine what is an injustice and what is not. And what we see taking place today is gravely an injustice.
What do you say about the sniper who shot the officers last night?
In what regard particularly?
Well, what was your response when you realized what had happened?
Tragic. It was absolutely tragic. It is, in any instance where you see a human being's life taken from them, and again, this is a situation where we try not to talk about the other side of the story because we understand an injustice when we see one. And when we look at what has happened in Dallas, my heart was torn. It's shattered. To look at this and to see officers who are family members, who are fathers, brothers, uncles, it's a tragedy. It's a shame, and it's not the way that justice is to be pursued.
The shooter said that he did this because of the shootings, the white officers who shot the black men. What is your response to that? I mean, is that obviously the sniper was clearly wrong? Mm-hmm. However, is there a part of you that can understand his frustration?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Again, I don't condone his actions at all. At all. But we have to understand that this did not come out of thin air. That he admitted over the phone that this was his personal reaction, not the Black Lives Matter movement's reaction, but his personal reaction to witnessing over and over and over again black victims of police shootings, and to go through the entire process. And we know what that process is. And usually in news networks is, they say an unarmed black suspect was killed by a police officer, and then protests will spur up, and a grand jury decision might not even indict the officer for crimes that we feel were gravely unjust. And to watch over and over again the lives that are taken at the hands of people who are paid by our tax money to protect and serve us, and to watch the grave inequity in how policing is done in our communities versus other communities. His anger came from a place that really needs to be dealt with in this country, that if it is not, justice needs to be pursued.
So how do you take that anger and that frustration that you can empathize with and make something positive? How do we move forward, everyone? How does everyone move forward?
Well, first we have to talk about it. We have to talk about it. The first thing that people try to do is to suggest that we should move our emotions to the side, and that's not the case. Our emotions need to be right here on the table. We need to put everything on the table. We need to have all of our animosities and anxieties about what has been happening, all the ugliness of the racism in this country that actually exists, all of the hidden truths that we've been sweeping under the rug. We need to put that right on the table, and now is the perfect opportunity to do so. We need to have an open and robust conversation about not just what has happened, but what continues to happen. And I've noticed that this conversation has really broadened itself in the last 2 years, where 2 years people were more likely to say that racism isn't here, and there are always people who deny it. But now the conversation is really developing, and conversation always leads to change. It leads to policy change. It leads to the way that we think about our culture as a society. It leads to different ways of putting value on human beings' lives. And so that's the first thing that we need to do, is have a robust conversation about this.
What are you and the next generation seeing as we move forward? What do you plan to do?
By seeing, you mean what we hope for?
As you look into the future, what do you see?
A bitter fight, a struggle, to be honest. This is a hard fight. This is a very hard fight. And of course, as an activist, I always have to have a certain amount of optimism, and I am very optimistic. But what I see in the upcoming years, and possibly my children's generation, is the same fight. This is the same fight that my parents have given me. It's the same fight that their parents have given them, and their parents before them. That as Black people in this country, one of the biggest things we inherit, if we don't inherit funds, if we don't inherit houses or other forms of property, we inherit a struggle. And it's a very sad reality in this country that whole generations of people have to fight every single generation. That my mother fought in the Black Power movement. My father was born in the Jim Crow South. His father before him was born in Mississippi. The father before him was a sharecropper, and his grandfather was a slave. That what I see in the near future is a conversation that needs to develop around race, that needs to develop around this political and cultural idea that was developed to divide and to destroy whole lives. That I worry for my kids, and I don't even have kids yet. I'm 21 years old, and I'm already worried for them. We have to understand that this is a grave problem in this country. But what I see in this future is a continued fight, a fight not against white people, but a fight against a system that continues to value white people over all other lives. A fight that says that you will not incarcerate 1/3 of a generation of men who look like me. A fight that continues to look at the fact that we are 14 times more likely to die of homicide than any other group in this country, and it's a bitter fight, and it's going to continue.
What do we, as white people, need to do?
I want you to care. There are too many that do not care. They say they care, and they will chant "All Lives Matter" to shout down the voices that are advocating for the rights, the needed rights of Black people. There are white people in this country who are not aware of these problems, but are so passionate about shutting people down who do talk about these problems. And this is what Jesse Williams was talking about on BET. He said, if you do not care to advocate for Black lives, then do not make suggestions for those who do. The apathy in this country is so devastating. Most people believe that racism floats on hatred, and that's not the case. Racism floats on fear and indifference. Fear about certain communities and an indifference about how we handle those communities. That white people have to understand that this is a problem worth caring about, and it affects their lives too. That the war on drugs, which mostly discriminated against Black communities, that militarized police forces, that opened up prison doors and shut down schools, that affect white people indirectly. That white people now have to also face militarized police whenever they're protesting, that billions of dollars of their tax money go to incarcerating Black men, and that this is a problem that affects their lives too. Racism comes at a very high price. So white people have to care.
All right, Mara, thanks so much. By the way, if you would like to join in the conversation, you can go to KRDO.com. We have the link there. We're moderating this conversation right now, and some of your questions we will read on the air to give to the panel to have a discussion. Heather, we'll send it back to you.
All right, very well spoken, Mr. Allen. Thank you so much for joining us. And again,